So let's talk about Ibn al-Qayyim. So he's known as Ibn al-Qayyim or Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah. Okay, Ibn al-Qayyim for short. But his like proper title is Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah. The translation of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah, Ibn is son, Qayyim is the principal of a school. Al-Jawziyyah is the school of al-Jawziyyah in Damascus. So he is the son of the principal of the school of al-Jawziyyah. That's the meaning of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah. Okay, there was a school in Damascus called al-Jawziyyah. Al-Jawziyyah. Okay, it was called al-Jawziyyah after a scholar who lived 100 years before Ibn al-Qayyim. So actually, when he died maybe about 45 years before Ibn al-Qayyim was born. Okay, his name is Abu al-Faraj Ibn al-Jawzi. Ibn al-Jawzi. Okay, so roughly there was roughly around 100 years between him and Ibn al-Qayyim. And he was also, both of them are Hanbali, by the way, followed the Hanbali madhab. Ibn al-Jawzi was a very prolific scholar. He wrote a lot, and he established a school in Damascus that is very close to al-Masjid al-Umawi. And it was named after him, al-Madrasa al-Jawziyyah. Al-Madrasa al-Jawziyyah. So the father of Ibn al-Qayyim at some point was appointed to be the principal of that school, the supervisor principal of that school. And thus he was known as Qayyim al-Jawziyyah, the principal of al-Jawziyyah school. Ibn al-Qayyim is his son, so he was named like that. It's more like a title, but his name is Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr ibn Ayyub. Okay? Originally, their family is from a town to the south of Damascus. It was called Az-Zura'. It is still there in South Syria today. But he was born in Damascus. He was born in Damascus. And subhanAllah, al-Madrasa al-Jawziyyah was actually a couple of times it caught fire and was destroyed, but then it was rebuilt later on. That's later on. And it remained a school. Then it was turned into a court. It was turned into mahkama, court. But then it was returned into a school. So around the year 1900, Gregorian, it was turned into a school. And later on, it was called Jam'iyyat al-Is'af. Okay, it was known in Syria as Jam'iyyat al-Is'af. But then it was demolished. They built shops. It's very close to al-Masjid al-Umawi. They built shops, and on top of the shops, they built a small musalla, prayer area. Okay, the size of the school or the building was shrinking slowly because neighbors were taking inches out of it every time. So it grew very small, smaller than its original size. Until today, I believe it's still there. Still there, as I said, there are shops, and on top of the shops, there is a small prayer room. Okay, so that was al-Jawziyyah. So that's Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyyah, or for short, Ibn al-Qayyim. In the Hijri calendar, he was born 691. 691. So we are talking about more than 755 years around this time. More than 755. That's the time he was born. Okay, 691. His father was a very religious man. He was a man of knowledge, but not very well advanced in knowledge. He was an educated person, specializing in some Islamic sciences, and thus he was the supervisor or the principal of al-Jawziyyah school. And when you say school, it taught mainly Arabic language, Quran, basic math. That was it, and Islamic sciences. So his father was a very known worshipper in the sense that he was someone who was very devout. He was known for his worship. He would pray at night. A lot of the time, he was connected to the masajid. So Ibn al-Qayyim grew up in this kind of environment. He was influenced by his father, and his father was his first teacher. His father was his first teacher. Ibn al-Qayyim started seeking knowledge before the age of 7 because of the environment. You might think, oh, it's too young for someone to start seeking knowledge. But no, there were no devices at the time. Pretty much the child from a young age would be taken to school to learn the Arabic language, learn the Quran, learn math, etc. So, and then after that, they would be taken to what is called Majalis al-Sama', the Hadith, where they would listen to the Hadith. From the scholars of Hadith, they would be mentioning the Hadith. Or the students would be reading the Hadith to the Shaykh, and the Shaykh would be approving of it and sometimes giving short commentary. This is a tradition, continuous tradition, from the time of the Tabi'een until today. It's still there. You'll find Majalis al-Bukhari today, Majalis Sahih Muslim, Majalis Sunan, all of these, where scholars gather and the student reads and the scholar listens and approves, and sometimes they give short commentary. So Ibn al-Qayyim, before being 7, he was actually taken by his father to these Majalis al-Sama', and he remembers some of them. And actually, one of his early teachers passed away when Ibn al-Qayyim was only 7 years old. And Ibn al-Qayyim mentions in one of his books how he actually attended the classes of this teacher, and he listened to a big number of hadith from him from a young age. So he still remembers that. So those kids matured early, and they took responsibility, or they became serious students of knowledge early in their life. So that's the environment that Ibn al-Qayyim grew up in. One of his influential teachers was someone known as Ahmad al-Wasiti. He has a title called Ibn al-Hazzamiyyin. Okay, Ahmad al-Wasiti, the reason I'm mentioning him, because it has a connection to the book Madarij Al Salikeen, because Ibn al-Qayyim quotes him a few times in the book Madarij Al Salikeen. Ahmad al-Wasiti originally grew up upon some Sufi tariqah, or Sufi method. And he went with people who really indulged in bid'ah, innovation, and these extreme practices of Sufism. But he also studied the Shafi'i madhab. He was a faqih in the Shafi'i madhab. At some point in his life, Ahmad al-Wasiti met Ibn Taymiyyah. And he was influenced greatly by Ibn Taymiyyah. So he actually switched over to the Sunnah and started giving da'wah to the Sufis, calling them back to the Sunnah. And he was he dedicated quite a bit of his later life to this. And he also switched, it's just a matter of preference here. He switched from the Shafi'i madhab to the Hanbali madhab. Nothing in any madhab that makes it better than the other. They're all approaches or schools of thought to understand fiqh. They are methods of study. Look at them this way. So Ibn al-Qayyim was influenced a lot by Ahmad al-Wasiti, and also by his transition, because we have indications. By the way, we don't know the details of the life of Ibn al-Qayyim were not really documented. We know the general frame of his life, but a lot of the specific details were not, preserved for some reason. But I think because his time was full of great personalities like Ibn Taymiyyah, al-Dhahabi, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, all these big names. So, when there is a big number, usually some details, go missing. Especially with someone who's not necessarily very, very outspoken. He was a public figure, but he was not very public, like if you compare him to Ibn Taymiyyah, for example. So some of the details were not documented, but you can always sort of infer some of the details from his writings. Ibn al-Qayyim, in his early life, he was influenced by Sufism, which is not the good part of or form of Sufism. So he was influenced by that. And at some point, I'm talking about his teenage years. And he started to be influenced by the people of Kalam. People of Kalam, they are the ones who speak, just to make it simple, okay? They are known for speaking about matters of Aqidah, specifically the names and attributes of Allah, and Qadr, and Iman, the nature of Iman, according to, with some philosophical background that was Islamized, called Ilm al-Kalam. Okay? So he was starting to get influenced by them. But then at the age of 19, he met Ibn Taymiyyah for the first time. Although both of them were from Damascus, but he met Ibn Taymiyyah for the first time when he was 19 years old. Yeah, at the time, Ibn Taymiyyah was about, well, Ibn Taymiyyah was in his 40s. Yeah, so when he met Ibn Taymiyyah, he stayed with Ibn Taymiyyah for the rest of his life, 16 years. So 16 years from the time he met Ibn Taymiyyah until the moment Ibn Taymiyyah passed away, 16 years. So he stayed with Ibn Taymiyyah all this time, and he was great. Ibn Taymiyyah was the greatest influence on Ibn al-Qayyim, and it's evident. He became the closest student to Ibn Taymiyyah. And all the students of Ibn Taymiyyah mention this when they write about the biography of Ibn Taymiyyah or the biography of Ibn al-Qayyim. They mention Ibn al-Qayyim as being the closest student to Ibn Taymiyyah. And Ibn al-Qayyim has a very long poem called An-Nuniyya because it rhymes with the letter N, Nun. And it's about between 4,000 and 5,000 lines of poetry. He mentions so many things about Aqidah, about fiqh, about debates, polemics, about Jannah, about everything. And he does mention the influence of Ibn Taymiyyah on himself. He says, I was about to go astray, but Allah saved me through this teacher, Ibn Taymiyyah. Okay? So, and he keeps mentioning Ibn Taymiyyah. He mentions Ibn Taymiyyah a lot. And he always says, Shaykhuna, like our teacher, or Shaykh al-Islam. Okay, so Ibn al-Qayyim, it seems that he started teaching a little early in his life, maybe his late teens or early 20s, but he formally became a teacher in his early 30s. And he was just like his father, like in worship. They described him as someone who would stay up most of the night and pray. Ibn Kathir, the great Mufassir, the one who wrote the Tafsir, he was a colleague of Ibn al-Qayyim. Okay, both of them were students of Ibn Taymiyyah. He mentions beautiful things about Ibn al-Qayyim, and he says he has this way of praying for so long that is very unique to him, meaning his patience and he has had a long breath in the ability to pray for so long and be so immersed in his prayer. So he was known for that. Ibn Kathir even mentions that some people criticized him that your prayer is just too long. And that's, by the way, when we are talking about Sunnah, we are talking about Qiyam al-Layl. He said, but Ibn Qayyim says that's the only way I know how to pray. So don't say anything about that. That's the only way I can pray. They know Ibn Qayyim to be very humble, very kind-hearted. He never held a grudge against anyone. But he was very brave. He was known for his bravery. He would not back down. He was very strongly supportive of his teacher, Ibn Taymiyyah. and he was put in prison with Ibn Taymiyyah a few times, especially at the last time when Ibn Taymiyyah actually passed away in the prison. The way Ibn al-Qayyim would spend his time in the prison was just to read Quran and reflect on it. And some of his students mentioned that this time was very beneficial for him. A lot of his findings came from that time, from reflecting on the Quran in the prison. Ibn al-Qayyim wrote so many books. The reason he met Ibn Taymiyyah only at age 19, although both of them lived in Damascus, was that Ibn Taymiyyah was in Egypt. He was put in prison for a few years. So Ibn al-Qayyim only came to know him when Ibn Taymiyyah returned to Damascus. Ibn al-Qayyim engaged in debates with Christians, and some of them became Muslim through him. He engaged in debates with those extreme Sufis. He engaged in debates with the people of Ilm al-Kalam, like again, Ash'aris, Maturidis. He engaged with them in debates and discussions. He even engaged with some Jews, with some Jews who lived in that area in Damascus at the time. He wrote so many books. So he wrote a book, guiding the ones that are lost among the Christians, Hidayat al-Hiyara ila Ajwibat al-Nasara. What stands out about Ibn al-Qayyim, he did lead the prayers in some masjid in the same school, al-Jawziyyah, where he was a student, then he became a teacher himself, and there was a musalla there, so he would lead the prayer there. He also would give the khutbah, Friday khutbah, in another masjid, and he would give fatawah, like official fatawah. But what he excelled in was writing. Ibn al-Qayyim had a huge library. And at the time, libraries were manuscripts. So it was not easy to get a copy of a book, by the way. All of them were handwritten. So Ibn al-Qayyim had a huge library. He actually spent whatever he had on his books. So he had a huge library. So that gave him a lot of exposure. And he was very intelligent. So imagine studying from a young age, having a lot of resources, or and a lot of books, and having all this exposure and access, and having very good teachers. One of his teachers was a lady, by the way, but she was an old lady, just in case. So I think when Ibn al-Qayyim was born, she was in her 60s. Just gives you an idea. She was a scholar, narrator of hadith. So he was a very prolific writer. A lot of his books are just multiple volumes. The most accurate estimates of his works, the books that we have that are printed, that are available now, are 37 books, and most of them are multi-volumes. He has books that are lost. We don't have them. The manuscripts are lost, but maybe they will be found, because some of his books that are available now were non-existent. Like 10 years ago, we have some books now that we didn't have 10 years ago. They were found in libraries of manuscripts. Specifically the stolen manuscripts that are still available in Europe in private libraries. So he has, what we know, there are 38 titles, that are lost. We don't have the books. We don't have the manuscripts available as of now. Or maybe that number changed. I don't know, but this was a few years ago. One of them is a book I really wish they could get it, which is called Al-Ruh wal-Nafs, the Ruh and the Nafs. It would be interesting to see what Ibn al-Qayyim specifically says about this. So I'm trying to. He made Hajj many times. He made Hajj many, many times. And he actually spent some time in Mecca. In Mecca, particularly, this is called mujawara, basically to be a neighbor to the Masjid al-Haram, basically spend most of his time at the Masjid al-Haram. He did that, and he does mention it. I think in Madarij Al Salikeen, he does mention that when he was in Mecca, he experienced some pain and some illness that he said in Mecca there were no doctors at the time. There were no medical practitioners like other cities, and there's no medical services like other cities. So he said, and I would medicate myself with Surah Al-Fatiha, the Quran, and honey. And he said, I saw miracles using that to treat my illnesses. Um, yeah, he wrote many of his books when he was traveling. Actually, in Mecca, he wrote a few of his books. One of them is um, Miftahu Dar al-Sa'ada, the key uh, to the house of happiness. One of his beautiful books. He wrote it when he was in Mecca. He didn't have his library, by the way. He wrote many of his other books when he was actually traveling. So he does say in the introduction, he does like apologetically say that, you know, I wrote this book not in the best of circumstances. I wrote it when I was traveling. And you know, when they were traveling, they were not traveling by car or bus or airplane. They were traveling on foot and, you know, just having camels or horses. So you can imagine he would write books in circumstances like this. But that shows you his attachment to knowledge and producing knowledge. So he wrote many of his books. Most notably, Zad al-Ma'ad, one of his most famous books, was written when he was literally traveling. He said, I wrote it without any references. And the book is highly referenced, by the way. Like he mentions a hadith and he mentions the sources of the hadith. So it's amazing. So it shows you that his memory was phenomenal and his knowledge was just impressive. Rahimahullah ta'ala. Back to his teacher, Ahmad al-Wasiti, we said, who had been sort of with the extreme Sufis, but then he switched after meeting Ibn Taymiyyah. Ahmad al-Wasiti had a commentary on a book called Manazil al-Sa'irin. Manazil al-Sa'irin was written by Abu Ismail al-Harawi. Abu Ismail al-Harawi, he died in the 400s Hijri calendar, which basically means he lived about 300 years before Ibn al-Qayyim. 300 years plus before Ibn al-Qayyim. Okay? So, and he comes from, again, Sufi tradition, when again, Sufism did not really, when Sufism at the time, some strands started to go off. They started to, you know, go really to extremes. Started. Prior to that was Sufism that was still mainly upon the Sunnah. So Abu Ismail al-Harawi, he has his own story, by the way. He was in what's known today as Afghanistan. He was very harsh against the people of Kalam, against the Mu'tazila, against the Ash'aris, against the Maturidis. He was very, very strong, very like headstrong, confrontational approach to them. But in his kind of worship, he had these Sufi tendencies. And again, you can see some of the inappropriate aspects of Sufism, but they are not far off. They're not far off. So he wrote this book called Manazil Al Salikeen. Manazil Al Salikeen, which means the stations of the travelers. Manazil Al Salikeen. And I think he identified about 100 stations. He divided them into 10 groups, 10 stations each. I think the book was translated recently by Dr. Hatim Al-Hajj. And he even made a series on his YouTube channel on Manazil al-Sa'irin. Okay. So Manazil al-Sa'irin became very popular. It's written in a mystic way, but it rhymes. It's very poetic. It's very symbolic. Identifying each one of those stations and identifying the different levels in them. So pretty much everyone of a Sufi orientation adopted the book, and then some Sufi personalities started to put their twist on the book by explaining it, by providing commentary. So among the most notable of them, someone was who was known as a Tilmsani. Tlemcen is a city in West Algeria today. It's right on the borders of Morocco. Tlemcen, and but this Tlemceni was really like when you read his like what he has to say, he literally believed that Allah and His creation are one. Okay, which is the unity of being. He literally believed that what you see is a manifestation of the Creator, and it's not separate from the Creator. Okay, not in an allegorical or literary way, not realistically. For him, factually, that is what he believed. So he put his twist on what Abu Ismail al-Harawi said in his text. And then this tradition continued because the language is very symbolic. It's easy, it can easily be interpreted as you like. So the people of Ahlul Sunnah tried to push against this. Ibn al-Qayyim was frustrated with that, and he noticed that this book, Manazil Al Salikeen, became the standard textbook for all Sufi sects, all Sufi methods and tariqah, all of them, right? So that was the book, but they were again putting their twist on it. Ibn al-Qayyim, he was very fascinated with the knowledge and the writings of al-Harawi. He read all of his books. He even calls him Shaykhuna, like our teacher, because he actually, like, he learned so much from his books. And he says it's injustice that his book was somehow hijacked by people who are, forcing their interpretation on it when the original author did not mean it this way. So he said we have to bring the book back to its origin, but he thought, that's too much. It's such a big wave. It's hard to push against it. And we'll come to this when we talk about the book. Ibn al-Qayyim actually started this book with one intention, but as soon as he started early in the book, he changed his plan. So Ibn al-Qayyim started to write a book on the stations of the travelers to Allah. He wanted to create an original book. He wanted to write his own book, and he intended for his book to be short. He does mention this in the introduction. He wanted to mention like a short book to mention the stations and give a very short description that is beneficial. And he said there's no need to get into the details. He says so that people know what's right. And then he actually started. He did start talking about 4 stations that he considers to be the foundational ones. And then after he talks about them, you can see a shift in the book. He starts quoting Al-Harawi, Abu Ismail al-Harawi's text, and then commenting on it. And then he continues with all of the stations from the book of Al-Harawi, and the book becomes a commentary on the book of Al-Harawi. So you can actually sense the transition. You can somehow sense the transition. So Ibn al-Qayyim he shows the frustration of how these people twisted his works, and he does call them out, these people. And I think that should be enough about Ibn al-Qayyim. Again, although he engaged in public life, he was not like this very public figure. Sometimes financially his situation would get better, sometimes would not be as great. Some of his great students is actually his son. Ibn al-Qayyim lives for 60 years, Hijri calendar. Now, this would be about maybe 58 years in the Gregorian calendar. So he was born 691, he passed away 751. So 60 years in the Hijri calendar. In his book, Tuhfatul Mawlud, where he talks about newborns and the rulings about them and everything about newborns and about raising kids and things like that. He does actually offer the book as a gift to his son because his son had a son, like the grandson of Ibn al-Qayyim. So Ibn al-Qayyim mentions, he says, I wanted to give a gift to your son for the birth of your son, but I don't have anything, so I'm going to give you this book as the gift. Accept it. So again, financially, he would be okay, but sometimes he really lived an impoverished life. But he did not seek any kind of affluence or any kind of riches. He was just completely focused on knowledge, studying, teaching, writing. Where he really excelled was with his books. His style is described by many scholars as just being so poetic. It flows so nicely. And they said it's very hard for writers to write at that level, which is true. And subhanAllah, they say his books were accepted by people who agree with him and people who disagree with him. So you find actually even extreme Sufis sometimes, they actually celebrate his book and they accept it, not realizing that he actually fires at them most of his books, subhanAllah. And he's accepted with even by people who disagree with him.